Anyway, I'll get into tonight's program then. Tonight's program is a follow-up to last April's program, which covered the buses that serve the Grosse Pointe community. Ken Schramm, author of Detroit Street Railways, which I just held up one of the Arcadia books, will present a slide presentation relating to the various streetcar companies and DSR streetcars and interurban cars that once formed a vast public transportation system in metropolitan Detroit, with an emphasis on those that operate in and around the Grosse Pointes. The book tells the story of public transportation in the Motor City, mainly through photographs from his and his father's collection from 1863, when horse-drawn streetcars served as public transportation in Detroit. And these, they were used to carry people around mainly to their businesses and for pleasure. And it was consolidated into one company, the Detroit United Railways, and then later the establishment of the municipally owned Detroit Street Railways, or DSR, on May 15, 1922, led to them inheriting a vast system of streetcar lines. And it was the first city in the country to have its own transit, municipally owned transit system. It was a leader and innovator in transit industry. What happened? Anyway, with a continued streetcar service until April 8, 1956, with the last streetcars on Woodward Avenue replaced by buses. Bus service started in 1925 as a feeder service, but sadly, this implementation led to the demise of the streetcars. Ken grew up in Detroit near Moross Road, 7 Mile Road here. Attended Bishop Gallagher High School in America Woods, earned a BBA from University of Michigan, an MBA from the University of Detroit, and a Master's of Science in Program Management from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Nicer weather there than U of D and U of M. After working for the City of Detroit in the Industrial and Commercial Development Department for 7 years, he's now been employed for 20 years by TACOM, U.S. Army Tank and Automotive Armaments Command, and he currently resides in a 3,000 square foot home near the GM Tech Center in Warren, where in his basement there are 42 file cabinets, which are stuffed. He needs more. The rest of the house is nearly full with three-dimensional items related to buses, trains, and other forms of transportation. His father, Jack, unfortunately was unable to join us, but he's written several books, as most of the people here I think know. Co-authored 6 books and numerous articles on the history of streetcars, interurbans, and buses in Detroit and southeastern Michigan. And they share their archives with museums and libraries through historical preservations and three-dimensional displays. And as I mentioned, there are copies of Ken's book here tonight for him to autograph afterwards. Turn it over to you, and you're going to just tell me when to advance the slides, right? Okay, good. Ken Schramm, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank Mike, and thanks for the Grosse Pointe Historical Society for the nice, kind invitation. It's very nice to be gratified to see such a nice turnout for this. That shows interest in the DSR and our early transit system that hopefully many of you got a chance to ride. Unfortunately, I came after the era of streetcars, and I grew up in a family that my father worked for the DSR for 40 years, so we were always interested in public transit. In fact, when I was growing up, my father never drove a car. He wasn't able to drive, and my mother later got sick. She couldn't drive until I drove for several years. Unless the bus got there, the DSR got us there. We didn't get there, so go downtown many times on my shopping. The program tonight is really a tribute to my dad, who I mentioned has worked for the DSR for 40 years and saved a lot of the pictures.
Move the mic up just a little bit closer to your mouth. Thanks.
And the records which contributed and led to his publication. He has 2 books on the DSR itself and an additional 4 books on the various interurban system that comprise the Detroit area, running from Detroit to Port Huron, down to Monroe, out to Jackson, and up to Flint. In addition, he's written several magazine articles on the various bus companies, such as Lakeshore Coach, which operated before SEPTA here for many years. My father was named the official historian for transportation by Dennis Archer several years ago, and shortly at the Board of Directors meeting coming up in April, SMART is going to recognize Dad with the official designation as the official historian for SMART. Let me ask you, how many people here remember or rode the Detroit United, the old interurban, anywhere here in the Detroit area? Okay, one back. Okay. Now how do you remember riding or at least seeing the DSR streetcars? Yeah. Okay. Not a problem. One thing is, I always ask in my programs, we're always willing to share, and I love having programs and pictures. If anybody anything to share with us at some point, if they got some pictures, if their family member old or work for the different companies, old artifacts, please see me. I got my flyer at the back with my name and address and phone number and email and everything else you need. And please get a hold of me, and we'll always love to copy it or share the assembly. We were able to put stuff together. Now, I'm going to be awarding this. This is a major program. In fact, this is a one-of-a-kind program. We actually presented this at the annual Hoosier Traction Meet in Indianapolis this past September. It's a national get-together of all the people interested in electric train transit operations from around the country. The slides came only from my father's collection, but also Dick Andrews. Dick is a member and been with the Michigan Railroad Club for many, many years. Used to work for AAA in the map department. You will see a lot of the maps, and Dick Andrews is the one who created each and every one of these individual maps. The program is over 200 slides long. As you can see, I can talk pretty fast, but please sit back and relax. You're probably going to be here. You want to see the entire program for about an hour and a half. It's a little extra long.
We have to be out by midnight.
And feel free to ask any questions or anything. As Mike mentioned, we're going to start. You know, the earliest form of transportation wasn't electric. It was really horse-drawn streetcars operating. Say the earliest form of transportation here in Detroit was not electric. Electric operation didn't come into the 1890s. It started with horse-drawn streetcars in 1863. And from there we will start. We'll go through the end of the DSR streetcar operation, which ended on April 8th, 1956. We'll follow it up with the later rail operations, the Washington Boulevard trolley line, which itself has now been abandoned, followed by the current people mover. The people mover itself will be celebrating its 20th anniversary this year on August the 1st. I know it's hard to believe it's been around 20 years. We also have a chapter in there about the old electric coaches that operated in Detroit as well. Can you hear me okay?
No.
No? Okay.
You know, the extra is the volume there on that too. Ken, I should have adjusted beforehand, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Usually my voice is loud enough. Test, is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, good.
So we'll start with the first really form of transportation here in Detroit, and not electric, but horse-drawn. You can start.
There we go.
I gotta watch this myself.
That's right. Nobody remembers this.
All right.
No.
Yeah, this is one of the Detroit City Railway lines, cars, horse car 66 on the Woodward line. The interesting thing about the horse cars, the very first 4 streets that horse car lines, which were Jefferson, Woodward, Mission, and Gratiot, were also the very same 4 streets, last 4 lines that the DSR operated streetcar lines. So the very first became the very last 4 as well. By 1874, you can see the wide growth of additional lines. By 1874, the city offered 10 different horse car lines operated by 7 different horse car companies.
Wow.
Here we find a Fort Wayne in Elmwood, horse-drawn car near Fort Wayne. This is a Grand River Street Railway with employees. Here we have Woodward looking south toward the Detroit River. And the interesting thing about, back up a minute, Mike, the interesting thing about that photo,
We're lost.
I'm so sorry.
the interesting thing about this photo, if you notice real closely, there's a gauge of track. There's 2 different companies operating on 2 different gauges of track. One was a narrow gauge, which was just 4 feet 7, and the other one was a standard 4 feet 8 and a half. This was in 1890.
Steel rails?
This is the foot Woodward showing some of the various horse-drawn streetcars.
Excuse me, steel rails or wooden rails? Iron.
B rail, steel over ties.
Okay.
During the winter months, to make it much easier for the streetcars to be horse-drawn. They actually took the wheels off and put slades underneath them. This is actually shown in Wyandotte. This is a map of the Detroit Citizens Railway Company in 1895. You can see the wild, not only the expansion, the amount of lines, but the conglomeration. In 1874, you had 10 different companies. By 1895, you had a bigger consolidation. This is an experimental streetcar. It was a Wilder's patent shown here at Fort Wayne in 1888. This is another experiment up in North Detroit. And North Detroit then was considered a 6-mile road. It was a Healy steam motor with trailer. This is the Ampere, operated by the Highland Park Railway, shown here near Woodward Avenue and the Michigan Central Railroad Station. This is on Dix Avenue, and this is the Detroit Electric Railway using the new experimental Vanderpool system. And it also was Detroit's first electric streetcar line. This is the Detroit Railway, center entrance car 116 at 14th and Hastings. Fort Wayne and Belle Isle Railway, an open platform car number 82. This is downtown Detroit on an aerial view highlighted by the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Notice the absence of something, no automobiles.
Right.
Is that the 1880s then, or?
That is 1890s, yes.
Okay, that's, hold it again.
That's Cadillac, right? That's
Cadillac Square to the left and Woodward to the right.
Okay.
City Hall. The City Hall's just off to the right.
Now in January 1901, the few remaining independent streetcar companies became they became the Detroit United Railway. This is a map of its system. In 1902, not only operated all the city lines, but it also offered a lot of the longer range interurban service, such as up to Port Huron, over to Jackson, Ann Arbor, up to Flint, down to Toledo. The Detroit United Railway also operated the Deep Transit Company in Windsor, Ontario. This is a map on May 18th, 1922, highlighting where the DUR also had city services in addition to long range. They not only operated the Detroit city services, but they also operated independent city services up in Port Huron and Flint, Jackson. So it was quite a very large operation. They employed thousands of employees, hundreds of miles of track, thousands of cars. I mean, the Detroit United was a major transportation company. This is one of their open bench cars on the Myrtle line. Trouble car number 493. This is one of their enclosed on the Sherman line. This is the larger car 828. You notice now we've got the double trucks. Expansion, business was booming. They had to get bigger, more powerful cars. They also offered a very special private car, the Alandi, for private parties. You notice the curtains. This is not only for their officials to go around tour the line, but also you could charter this for special parties.
Front bumper, that's if somebody walks in front, you.
Cow catcher, yep, that's right. It's good for, but if you jumped out in front, they scoop you up instead of getting underneath the car. Downtown Detroit, you can see the growth. You got a few automobiles showing up, but also the proliferation of not only the single but the double truck interurban. So they have the controller. That's why you have the motorman and the conductor, and you have the control panel up in the front to notch the different levels of speed.
What's all this do again, they're starting to put motors right in the wheels of the new cars, up to electric assist cars. You know?
That's right.
He got rid of it.
Go back to electricity.
Did they get rid of conductors at one point? Did they ever get rid of the conductors, the gentleman was asking?
Well, later, one of the big problems, and really what really led the DSR to, one of the causes to get rid of the streetcars was the fact that most of the streetcars, the older ones, the Peterwitz, were really a two-man operation. They had the motorman up in the front, and they'd have the conductor in the middle of the car collecting fares. Later, when they came up with the new streamlined PCC streetcars after the war, they went to a one-man operation. That was really an effort to save overhead and labor costs. And the problem is, as you know, later years there was competition between the streetcars and the buses because the buses were all one-man operation. So it was a big cost savings when they had to get rid of the Peterwitz, unfortunately. This is a Shoemaker Yard showing the fleet of the Burning. This
Same site now, Warren?
This is the same site. which the DSR and later DDOT, this is one of the east side terminals over at Shoemaker and St. Jean. The property is still used, it currently has been mothballed, waiting restoration. It is also was the nurse center for the DSR, where their administration building is. It still stands, it's abandoned, but it is slated to be torn out sometime this year.
Ken, your father was head of finance in that building?
He was head of the payroll up there, and I remember going to that building many, many, many times. And Dad worked up on the 3rd floor.
And I think the thing you told me that amazed me, what year did he retire?
He retired in '82. So
And they had no computer until that point.
At that point, when he left that building in '72, that building never had a computer and they had no air conditioning. But the transit system that he left and operated through for the 40s and 50s far surpassed anything we've had today with the high technology. This is car number 240 in service at Shane in Gratiot on April of 1938. In 1939, the last burning car operated in Detroit. By 1924, 200 of these birdies were already up for sale. Here we find ex-birdie, DSR birdie 2230 is shown here in service in Montreal, renumbered by them 200. Now, the car is now located at the Railroad Museum at Delson near Montreal. The city of Montreal purchased 20 of these birdies, others went up to Nova Scotia and some of the smaller operations, but one ex-DSR car has survived and is still up at Montreal. Here we find Peterwick 11037 next to the DSR's administration building, one building I was talking about, located at Shoemaker and St. Jean. The first Peterwood arrived in Detroit on October 8, 1921. It was originally number 1037. However, the DSR numbers clashed with the DUR numbers, so they had to renumber it 11037. This is the building that is still standing and it's slated for demolition. It's been abandoned for about 20 years. I've been through it many times. We've rescued a few artifacts for preservation. But it's going to be a sad day. It's, it was a great building. It was well built. It's solid, a lot of marble and brass, state of the art when it was built in 1920.
I drove past that building today, and I said to myself, man, that's a nice looking building.
It was, Ford State, again, rehab, but
Excuse me, who was the manufacturer of a lot of those streetcars?
Coleman was built, St. Louis, Cincinnati Car Company. They had a lot of different competing companies.
Did they operate on the same gauge track as the trains? did?
Yes,
So they
4
could
feet,
move
yeah.
the same-
Not all of them. Detroit did. Toronto, for instance, was a wide gauge, over 5 feet. Detroit was a standard gauge, 4 feet, 8.5. And in fact, you'll see a picture of a piece of equipment here, very unique to Detroit, and it operated from Cincinnati over the railroads and came into Detroit under its own power.
Put them together and pull them with a locomotive, right?
No, it operated under its own power.
No, when they would deliver them from one city to another.
Oh, for most of the time, they would put them on a flat car, bring them to the shops, and load them and load them.
Okay.
Here we find municipal operation car 11032 is operating on the DUR and joint service on the Trumbull line, and this is at the end of the Trumbull line. You can see how wide open the city of Detroit was here. The DSR received 1,029 cars, trailers, 10 car houses, and 273 miles of track when the city purchased it from the DUR. As shown here, you can see that because the DUR knew they were going to be forced to sell, they left a lot of the equipment much to be desired. Here's this car 1733 on the Harper line. Car 1729 is on the 4th Street line on its way to the DSR's Gleason Y. Car 3015 and trailer, these were the ex-DUR steel cars and considered by many best in the fleet. The DSR 781 Peterwoods were numbered in the order received 3,200 to 3,980. Here we find Peterwood 3230 passing the Gratiot Car House on Harper Avenue. Here we find Peterwood 3228 in the DSR Baker Yard, which was the west side main shops off of Livernois. Car 3230 is taken in 1948 on Epworth at Tireman on the Claremont line, driving by another Detroit landmark, these collapsible natural gas tanks. Here we find car 3268 on the Claremont line taken in 1947. look like a, very pleasant, very quiet Detroit neighborhood. Here we find Peter Witt 3342 taken in 1949 on the Bagley line. This is directly behind the Michigan Central. The bridge that he's going over is over the tracks leading to the Detroit River Tunnel leading over to Windsor. Car 3366 on the Woodmere line near the end of the line at 4th Street. Also, this is one of the few lines that the DSR actually were able to operate that Peter Witt with a single, just one operator and conductor. Car 3544 in Grand Belt. Car 3556 on Hamilton, loading in downtown Detroit in 1928. The sign over the little lean-to there, which was also saying indicating cars for way here for the interurban. So this is also where the DR is still operating its long-haul interurbans operating up to Royal, Birmingham, and Flint. Car 3574 is showing the additional third door, which was added to improve passenger movement. About 35 of these were converted during the 1930s. It was a WPA project. However, all they did was lose a couple seats, and the door was so narrow, it was just difficult to maneuver. This is at the Rouge, showing loading car number 3123 on the Baker line.
They had 101,000 people there in 1929, but they had shift changes every 10 or 15 minutes. These were constantly pulling through that.
Absolutely.
Right, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, because you gotta realize that at that time, when you had 100,000, you didn't have a parking lot or a parking structure big
Right.
enough to handle all the cars. I mean, people working at the Rouge or most of the auto plants got there by the DSR. Another shot at the Rouge. This is Woodward Avenue, showing the Peter Witts in 1937. 3907, going underneath the Michigan Central Viaduct on Woodward, heading to downtown Detroit. This is Capitol Park, loading the Peter Witts. It's interesting to note they're loading the Grand River line, and at that time, 1940s, the headway between streetcars on the Grand River line was 1.5 minutes.
Take longer than that to load them.
This is on the Gleason line, Y at the end of the 4th Street line. Going by Rick Stadium in 1935.
What year? I'm sorry.
1935. During the war, the DSR got in the award spirit by painting up a few cars, encouraging the people to buy war bonds. This is also out at the Baker Yard on the Baker line. Peter Witt 38084 is on the Oakland Avenue line. Notice the deck roof.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. 3104 is the arch roof. I mean, you really get into it, the different models and types of streetcars of Peter Witt's.
Were those coal-burning stoves, I see a smoke?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. And they were still operating the coal-burning stoves even during the Second World War. With the war coming, a couple of the lines that the DSR had abandoned, they were forced back into service because the fact is we had no rubber, so they couldn't substitute the buses. So they put every car, even on a scrap line, back into service, including some of these coal-burning cars.
Are those cars DC or alternating current operated?
DC.
DC?
Motors and the powerhouses, yeah.
Right.
The next slide. 320 or 3,200. You want to hit that one?
Yeah. Yeah, this is on the Claremont line. This is crossing Woodward Avenue. Northern High School is immediately to your right. He's crossing the Woodward line. Nice brick paved street. Peter with 3312 on the Baker line. This is on the Claremont line going underneath the another Michigan Central Railroad viaduct on the east side of Detroit on Milwaukee. Peter Witt in the Baker Yard. You also notice the car next to it is one of the three-door converted ones. This is on Nevada, approaching Van Dyke.
Sir,
Yes.
I noticed there was a safety zone there. I
Yes.
recall dodging cars out there waiting for a street car. Not to that point.
There it is,
three-door conversion. This is shown in the Baker Yard. This is on Joseph Campo in front of the famed Lasky Furniture. And of course, we also identify this as Hamtramck, but actually we're standing still within the city of Detroit city limits here. This is on the Claremont line here with 3737, and this is the last day of the Claremont line at 35th and McGraw. Here we show the Baker streetcar passing through downtown Detroit, passing by the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Of course, that's the First National building in the background. This is at Eagle Pass. This is where the Baker and the Michigan streetcar lines would merge. This is DSR's home-built and unique pier with 3850. The DSR wanted to incorporate a lot of the features that some of the manufacturers were not offering, so they decided to improve upon it and build this pier width in their own DSR shops at Highland Park. Here we find pier width 3884 on Grand River near 7 Mile Road, heading into downtown Detroit. This is on Baker Car on Monroe Street in downtown Detroit. This is on the Baker line on Verner heading eastbound. Note the railroad watch sign out there, railroad watch inspection there. This is Peter with 3900 on the Claremont line's last day in 1951. He's on Joy crossing Grand River. The Grand River streetcar line had already been abandoned. You can just see the remnants of the diamond still in the street on this intersection. This is on the Oakland line, just leaving Manchester, heading on to Oakland Avenue. This is on Joseph Campo, heading for Davison. And I think I go with train through.
What is the fastest speed those streetcars go fly?
Well, in open areas, they did have some private right-of-ways, like on the Baker line where they were off the streets. They could probably hit about 60.
50?
60.
Oh.
Yeah, they're powerful in the interurbans, from going on the long range, they get up to 70. Now here we have kind of a rare shot. This is the DSR pier leaving Royal Oak, heading on the Woodward. When the Detroit United Railway abandoned its services north of Detroit up through Royal Oak, Birmingham in 1931, the city of Royal Oak was pretty sharp. They said, hey, we still like to keep some streetcar and rail service heading in. How about if we pay you to maintain the track and we'll pay you the operations? And really from 1931 until this service was abandoned in 1947, Royal Oak offered streetcar service to downtown Detroit. This is inside Peter with 3876. This car, by the way, is at the Ohio Railway Museum. Now here we find
What museum?
the Ohio Railway Museum. Two cars were handpicked when the DSR was closing down the area of the pier. One went to the Ohio Railway Museum, where it still is at. Unfortunately, they didn't take the best of care. They left it outside. The second car was donated to the Detroit Historical Museum. Well, the Detroit Historical Museum never made use of it, and they eventually ended up trading it with the Henry Ford Museum, where it sat outside of the Henry Ford Museum for many, many years unprotected. They finally decided to move it into the museum. They had one guy on staff who did some initial restoration. I remember going out there 25 years ago and taking prints and working with them, and then they decided to eventually sell the car, and the car is now being restored in the Illinois Railway Museum north of Chicago.
This is the one at Selfridge, streetcar?
The one at Selfridge was the later generation. It was the PCC that was retired, car number 268. It operated here in Detroit till 1956. It was sold along with the other PCCs down to Mexico City, where it operated for 30 years. When they decided to eventually sell and replace the PCCs in Mexico City, the transit company there donated the car back to the Michigan Transit Museum. The museum was responsible for transportation charges. Unfortunately, because the museum does not have any electrical overhead, it doesn't operate, but they did have it restored and repainted in the old original DSR colors, and that's where it's at today.
Didn't some of them originally have wicker seats?
Oh, the older ones did, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, no Peter Wood, sure. This is car 3616 on the Baker line on Nevada, crossing the Michigan Central Railroad tracks, and you notice the particular guard, what they call trolley guard, It was in case that overhead would ever come down, they'd catch it so it wouldn't go live on the railroad main line. That's a very busy main line. That's the line from Detroit up to Bay City and eventually all the way to Mackinac City. This is Peter with 3770 in the Highland Park at the Car House. The main center for the Detroit United and later the DSR were the shops up in Highland Park, located at just off of Woodward in Manchester. These shops remain even by the DSR for bus operations to about 1970. But again, as I mentioned, the city was responsible for paying Highland Park taxes for, so they decided to move the main shops down to its current location, which is just off I-75 and Warren Avenue in Detroit. This is car 3860 in 1949 on Woodrow Wilson on the Trumbull line heading northbound. This is a Peter with 3874 at the Weyburn Loop. Now this should be very close because it's just over here in Grosse Pointe. This is on the DSR's Jefferson line, and the car is especially decorated with a special banner commemorating the DSR's 90th anniversary of streetcar service in Detroit, held on August the 16th, 1953. And it would only be a few years after this when we see the end of all streetcar service in Detroit. This is Peter with 3874 on Woodward, passing underneath the Michigan Central Railroad track. This is near the current Amtrak station. This is car 3902 taken on the Trumbull line at Woodrow Wilson and Oakland. Now here's another one for the East Siders. This is car 3931 taken in November of 1951 on Mack Avenue and Alter Road. Car 3934 is taken on September 2nd, 1950 on Oakland at Oakland in California. Here we find Peter with 3977 taken October 1951 on the Baker line. He is en route to the Ford Rouge plant. He is shown here on Porter Street leaving downtown Detroit. Now the next series of shots are kind of unique in conjunction with the 90th anniversary of streetcar service here in Detroit. The city of Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming, had closed down their streetcar operation, and they inherited some of these smaller burning cars from another operation out there. The Henry Ford Museum worked with the National Railway Historical Society to have one of these cars shipped from Cheyenne in an open railroad gondola car en route to the Henry Ford Museum. This car today is still in the Henry Ford Museum. It's one of the 3 streetcars that they still have maintained and own. And by the way, Fort Collins, where this car originally operated before Cheyenne, has since gone back to streetcar service. They found one of these cars somewhere in the country. They restored it. And I also know that they probably have asked the Henry Ford Museum numerous times to see if they could convince them to release the car back to them, to no avail. So in conjunction with this, the rail fans came together, the DSR, and they decided to run a special rail fan excursion using this car, the Peter Witts, and some of the new PCCs. I think they pretty well knew that the streetcar services were going to be coming to an end in their future, and they wanted to highlight and have some rail fan excursions. This is shown in the arriving in the yard and the Highland Park shops. And we're just having some series of shots showing in the yard here. Just amazing how easy it was to ship this stuff in an open gondola car. Today they have a fit here, breaking every window they could when it worked. And this is the transfer table. This is how you move the streetcars at the Highland Park shops. You actually roll this out, roll onto the car, and the actual track would actually move up and down depending on which bay they
That's
needed.
a turntable.
Well, it's what they call a transfer table. The railroad have a turntable which would be circular. The streetcars are required with what we call a transfer table.
For streetcars, for the most part, low maintenance vehicles.
Compared to steam locomotives, they sure were, absolutely, very simple. Absolutely. Because again, they picked up the power, they didn't have to generate. With the steam, they had to generate their own power on their own. Here, they just pick up the pole and they're picking up the current, so.
And when did they differentiate between the double-ended on the electrical connection and the single end?
Well, the Birdies were the double-ended, depending on the operation. You know, like the PCCs in the later years were strictly all single-ended operations. The Peter Witts were a combination depending on what manufacturer. The Bernie series, you notice was strictly a double end, which was nice because you didn't have to build a loop. You could just go to the end of the line, have the conductor flip the seats inside, and go to the opposite end, just change the pole, and away they went.
That was like Washington Boulevard, right?
Like Washington Boulevard, because they saved the expense of having a loop to turn the entire car around, keep it in one direction.
Go ahead.
This was such an important occasion, they even brought out, if you remember, when we wrote the coaches here, meet Miss DSR. They have a nice young lady here every month. This was Miss DSR for August of 1953. I'm still looking for one of these surviving Miss DSRs here.
I know one,
Oh, you do?
yes.
Well, don't leave out. We're trying to track down one, we can find one to interview one, we'd love to find out. Now, this is a map of the trip that they did, and in fact, this was such an important trip, they actually had a charter train coming in from Canton, Ohio, came to the 4th Street Union Depot, had, 15 cars, and they had a whole fleet of streetcars involved, and basically what they wanted to do was tour the few remaining streetcar lines in Detroit at that time. You know, the Jefferson Line, Woodward, Gratiot, and Michigan. And within a few years, all of this would be available.
But it ran all the way to Wayburn, into Grosse Pointe.
Yes, oh yeah, absolutely. In fact,
That point.
today the buses loop on the exact same curve. In fact, the tracks are still there. Once in a while, you go on Wayburn Street, where they got a break, you can still see the rail showing up. And this is some shots of the burning car operating through Detroit. Like I said, it only happened one day. And this is the car that's currently at the Henry Ford Museum. We still had some Peter Woods in the fleet. Downtown Detroit. See the Guardian building, Penobscot. This is in Highland Park in front of the Rouge plant.
Highland Park.
I'm sorry, in front of the Highland Park plant. Testing you, Mike, I'm just testing you. This is in front of the Art Institute. They made a stop here for all the people that come into the newly opened Detroit Historical Museum, which had just opened in 1951 for the 250th anniversary this year. This is along Jefferson Avenue, in front of the Chrysler plant. This is coming out of the Wayburn Loop, and if you notice real closely, you can still see the rail on the left side of this in the pavement, which was the old DUR interurban track leading up along the shoreline, heading up into Grosse Pointe. And this was still surviving in 1953, over 20 years after abandonment. This is on St. Jean, approaching Shoemaker. This is in front of the DSR's administration building, the ivy-covered building there. Still pretty good here at 53. This is over at the Gratiot Car House, and you can see in the distance the YMCA, which is still standing there at Cadillac and Harper. This is out on Michigan Avenue, heading out to the Wyoming Car House. This is out at the Wyoming Car House, the west side terminal for the DSR. You can already see the creeping buses coming in, and the PCC still operating. Yeah, this is the Peter Witt that the Henry Ford Museum got and stored outside for a number of years. And this is the one down in Worthington. The DSR one that went to Greenfield Village was 3865, and the Ohio Railway Museum got 3876. Some additional equipment that the DSR operated was this unique 3-car train. And this is the one the Cincinnati Car Company built in the 1920s, and it came to Detroit under its own power. You still had a vast network of interurban systems, including the Cincinnati and Lake Erie, and it came to Detroit on its own power. It was purchased from the Cincinnati Car Company and went into service on February the 21st, 1924. However, it was considered a failure due to it being underpowered and tying up the line. Okay, we'll show you in a couple different locations. They renumbered it about 3 different times. It's articulated, this interior showing the articulation between the cars. This is where the motorman would stand.
He stood?
He stood. is the car repeater with the 3850, which was built in the Highland Car Shops by the DSR. The buildings in the background are along Jefferson Avenue. He is on a spur leading into Waterworks Park. And if you're ever driving along Jefferson, and you're at the north side of the fence line for Waterworks Park, you often wondered why it's never a 90-degree angle, but the fence actually curves. Well, the reason it curves is because it used to follow the curvature of the streetcar line coming off of Jefferson leading into Waterworks Park. Waterworks Park used to get a lot of their charcoal and filtration chemicals at night from the DSR. The Detroit terminal would bring the cars down, interchange around the Jefferson Avenue plant, and the DSR not only operated passenger cars, but they had a whole fleet of work cars as well. And we're always love to see some pictures of this, but unfortunately this operation, from what I was told, always was at night when they didn't have a heavy volume of passenger cars on the Jefferson line. The DSR also built what we call the Blue Streak, car number 401. It was a very Art Deco, very streamlined looking car, and this is in the 1930s. They built this from some of the Bernies that they couldn't sell and they had to scrap. And it was, you know, a very nice car, but the only problem was, again, it was a little small, and the interior, they just did not have great height. I mean, I would be in trouble probably standing up in this car. So they kind of relegated it to one of the lighter lines, the Woodmere line on the lower west side of Detroit. But again, for 1930, it was a very streamlined, and we compare this car to the later cars after the war, the PCCs, a lot of similarities.
Ken, how was their safety record?
Excellent. No, they did. I mean, the streetcars had a very, very safe record, not a lot of casualties, I mean, unless you jumped out front. One of the worst accidents did occur, and I forget which line, where a streetcar had come up to a railroad crossing, and this is probably one of the reasons why you notice every bus today has to stop at a railroad track. And the streetcar was overloaded. The passengers were beyond really the safety area where the conductor, the motor was operating. And the guy came up to the railroad track and asked, "Is it clear?" And unfortunately, across the railroad track, a train had come through, sliced the car in two, and I think they killed like 20-some people. But that's one of the safety features today, if you ever notice. That's why buses stop on demand at every railroad crossing. This is the interior of car 401, and again, this was built at the DSR's own shops. DSR was very innovative. They were a leading transit company in the country. A lot of the cities, including New York, came here to study what the DSR was doing. Another shot in front of the Baker Car House. And this is its last paint scheme. It survived about the war. Again, it was just on a very lightly traveled line. In fact, one of the people who lent me these slides to do a lot of that work, Dick Anders, fortunately was able to ride this. He remembers riding this car. As I mentioned, the DSR had a whole fleet of work cars. They had to maintain a lot of the tracks, a lot of the yards and facilities. This is DSR work car 86, loading ties. We'll find DSR car 87, which was a differential dump being loaded with garbage at the Bona Vista yard to haul over to the Clifford Landfill behind the DSR's one-room car house. Basically, what they did was take the trash, load it here, and they were paid so much per tonnage. And this service actually operated from 1924 to 1936. It was a revenue maker, and again, the DSR was operating out of the fare box and revenue makers such as this. Here we are at the Clifford Landfill, where the 2 motor cars and 4 trailers were used in the service, and it lasted to 1936.
So they actually dumped?
They actually dumped it. And really, the Bona Vista yard is basically where the DPW yard is. If you're ever on 96, before you come up to Schaefer, there is a gigantic DPW yard off to the north or off to your right if you're heading west on 96. I drove over there to track down the streets. And pretty much where that turn is, and where that is where the old Bona Vista garbage yard is. As Ford Motor Company was expanding operations in Springwells and later Dearborn as we know it today, the DSR was pressed to transport workers. As you can see the expansion. This is showing on the Baker line. You can see the conglomeration of cars, equipment. This is the South Yard, which was built in 1929. It was actually built by money loaned by Ford Motor Company. Despite the staggered shifts, large crowds still continued to jam the facilities. Failing to obtain any rapid transit facilities, the DSR attempted to create a transit system on its own. Using Jefferson as a test, the DSR operated streetcars with limited stops. This service started on September 18, 1927, with only 6 stops on the inner 4 miles of the route. Service lasted until 1934. In between these stops, the DSR would have local buses pick up and take them to the appointed stops. But even then, the DSR was trying, this is a friend of mine who collects some of the DSR transfers. This is from his collection. Some of the conglomeration shapes and sizes of the different transfers. If you remember riding streetcars, even the buses. This is before the computer technology of today where you just get a chip and a little card. This is an advertisement here advertising the latest and greatest in DSR streetcars used in Detroit, the PCCs. They arrived here after the war. PCC 101, which was really a car originally destined for Pittsburgh, for the Pittsburgh Railways. It was however repainted, and you'll notice there's no standee windows in these particular 100 and 101. The DSR was so anxious to try out one of these cars, they actually convinced St. Louis Car Company to work this from Pittsburgh and bring it to Detroit to use. And the DSR continued to operate it to the end of service in 56. PCC 111 on the Baker line, and again, this is shown directly behind Michigan Central Station. It's kind of a rare shot because to accommodate the PCCs, which was brand new equipment, the DSR spent a lot of money upgrading a lot of the rail lines, and they kind of kept it to the main lines, such as Gratiot, Michigan, and Woodward. Baker never upgraded, and I understand this was kind of a rough riding trip with the PCC on it, but they did try it for a while, and this is kind of a rare shot of it on the Baker line in revenue service. This is on Gratiot Avenue. See the Stroh's Brewery in the back? And it must have been on a Sunday morning because there's sure ain't a lot of traffic. Going by Brick Stadium. Going by the Ford plant. Crossing the Michigan line in downtown Detroit, and that's the Majestic building. Out at Eastwood Park, on the Gratiot line. This is another view, we had an earlier view of Woodward Claremont. Now we're looking on the Woodward line, you can see that the Claremont car, which is an old Peterwood, is off immediately to the right. The Northern High School is immediately off to our right in this picture. So you can see the 2 types of equipment still being operated by the DSR as late as 1950. Again, there's another shot of the PCC at the Weyburn Loop. Passing by the Burners plant, downtown Detroit. Another shot downtown Detroit approaching the river.
Now there's a Boblo, there was a train that took you to Boblo, I see, right?
I think that's
This car here would actually loop because don't forget, the cars used to loop a lot closer to the river than
Oh, yeah.
the bus lines do.
Okay.
This is a special 3-car trip chartered for the Michigan Railroad Club on the last day of the Michigan Avenue line. This is a map showing the last 4 streetcar lines, which as indicated earlier, all but also happen to be the first 4 streets offering horse-drawn streetcars by Detroit in 1863.
So 1952, so for the last 4 years, that's all that was left.
That was all that's left. This is shown out at the Fairground Loop, PCC number 279, which also, by the way, is exactly where the city buses still loop today. This is car 268, and this is the car that is currently at Selfridge and owned by the Michigan Transit Museum. It's just had left the loop, heading south on Woodward. Another shot passing by the Majestic building in downtown Detroit. Burners. This is Jefferson Avenue, downtown Detroit. Wyoming at the end of the Michigan line approaching the loop. And had it just left the loop off Wyoming, it is heading on Michigan, heading back to downtown Detroit. And we should be at tray 3. PCC 203 on the Jefferson line. There were we're trying to group a couple of these by the lines. This is another shot on Jefferson. This is on the last day of the woodwork. And again, we find PCC 268 leading the pack. As you can see, it was a gloomy day for a really kind of a sad day in Detroit Transit District.
What day was it?
April the 8th, 1956.
51 years.
Yeah, this is about Highland Park. Now, just to kind of add a little insult to injury, it was well known that the DSR pretty much gave these cars away. There weren't a lot of takers. They were competing with other cities. In the 1950s, everybody seemed to be in a rush to get rid of their streetcar lines and go to a very host of coach companies. I mean, GMC was a leader, Mack was there, St. Louis were building coaches. And in order for the city to sell these to Mexico City, the Mexican transit official made the city of Detroit not only sell these cars, but asked them to repaint them in Mexico City colors and renumber them. And all they did was just take the DSR number and just put a 2 in front. So that 2162 was a former DSR car 162.
So there's still tape over that front light then, that's just been painted?
Yeah, just been painted. In fact, we got a shot in the paint shop.
Jeez.
And these all went down to Mexico City on flat car. Here they are painting it up for the Mexican City government, where they operated for another 30 years. It was one of the best transit bargains ever done. And here they are loaded up at the Island Park shops going on in the Detroit Terminal Railroad. One per flat car. And here are some shots of the DSR cars in Mexico City. Now, these were taken by Dick Andrews, who made a couple trips. Much to my regret, I never had a chance to get down there. I would love to have seen this operation. This is all along, by the way, Mexico City has progressed. Like a lot of the major cities, they go on the light rail and the subway system. The only thing Mexico City also did, and they did this on their own, was add doors on the other side, and this was to accommodate their loading facilities on these lines, so they could actually load on both sides of the car. Detroit never had this, but this was ex-DSR 137. Very pretty operation. I mean, they had several lines, and this was a big. And another thing that did these in not only was new technology, but if you remember, Mexico City had a major earthquake here a number of years back. And unfortunately, one of the car houses, or a couple of the car houses, a lot of these were stored, was totaled. I mean, they lost probably half their fleet in that earthquake as well. Mexico City eventually got tired of leaving a new paint scheme, and they came up with their own paint scheme later. And even snazzed up the windows, and they have some nice stuff. Now, some of the cars, they actually converted the motors, and this actually is one of the ex-DSR PCCs in a light rail configuration, pretty much just the motors, and even these, I understand, have been retired. Here we have another shot, 268 on the last day. We're back to Detroit, back to reality. And this is 268 already in the Mexico City colors, and again, this is a car that you can still see up at Selfridge, owned by the Michigan Transit Museum. This is it, shortly after it arrived from Mexico City up at Selfridge, and this is the last paint scheme by them. And this is just a map showing, the summer months you go for a ride, not on that car. They've got a South Shore car pulled by a diesel locomotive. You catch it up at Joy and Gratiot Avenue and go for a ride right around the base. They can take it over to the Air Museum. They operate basically from Memorial Day to about the first weekend in October on Sunday afternoons. And there it is, currently up at Selfridge. It's in storage, again, because of no electrical, and they've never been able to get a power pack to operate it. But it is at least painted in the DSR colors. We fortunately had an original decal, the old wing logo, which we had replicated, and it's on the car as well. This is a map showing all the streetcar lines that were still in operation in 1943. And at that time, the DSR operated 20 streetcar lines. And what we're going to do is just kind of show you a quick synopsis here of what happened. During the war, because of federal restrictions, no streetcar lines were abandoned. We couldn't get buses, the rubber formed. A lot of the old lines were put back in. But it didn't take long. The war was soon over, and bingo, they started abandoning lines here. Opened one on December the 9th. Hamilton in April of 47. Grand River, and, Grand River, if anybody's a transit historian, Grand River is one of the 5 major spokes, and you figure if they could get rid of Grand River, you get rid of any streetcar line. I mean, Grand River was a major line, a lot of private right-of-way in the outer stretches, very convenient, and they took out Grand River on May 5th, 47. Crosstown, October 47, was the national line. Harper, Grand Belt, 14th, Whitmere, this is where all the Blue Street used to
So
be.
they had cars that actually had, they would take coffins to the cemeteries, right?
Well, the DUR had their own, what you call the funeral cars. They actually had a fleet, 3 or 4 cars where you would actually take the coffin along with the bereaved party. They take it out actually to the cemetery, like Forest Lawn, they actually have their own siding off the interurban line, and they take the whole party, and very elaborate car, curtains and stuff, and even the Yolanda, with curtains offered its own dining service. So if you see any china, anything marked for the DUR, they did have china, I'm looking for it, please leave it. Kirchhoff and the Fort Line band cut up in 2 times. The DSR had a major strike in 1951. It was very prolonged, lasted several months over a lot of worker issues. At that time, a lot of the drivers, you could either be in the bus end or the rail line. You couldn't take your seniority, so it was a major strike which they finally settled. But the cost of it was that 3 streetcar lines were abandoned on the same day. And this is the Claremont, which is the one we saw going by the DSR's administration building. Mac. Baker, this is the Fame line going out to the Rouge. Now these are the series, these are the last of the big lines here. Well, Jefferson at 54, Michigan at 55, Gratiot, March of 56.
East Detroit was originally halfway, but it was already East Detroit by now, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And Eastwood was an amusement park?
The amusement park just north of 8 Mile, that's where they moved. And then the final blow came on April the 8th, 56. They had already abandoned the Royal Oak section in May of 47, and the final line came out on April 8th, 1956. And that is the reason, Mike was referring to the book, the reason why we put that book out. It came out last year just in time to commemorate the 50th anniversary. Now, after the DSR, we still have a few remnants of rail operations. If you remember the Washington Boulevard Trolley line in downtown Detroit, it operated somewhat as a bicentennial project, and it actually, hard to believe, it actually operated for about 30 years. It's been abandoned now for 3 years, and if you go to downtown Detroit today, there is absolutely no sign or remnant of the streetcar operation. The rail, the signage.
Sure there is, there's a piece of the track you and I have.
That's right, except for they brought these cars over from Lisbon, Portugal. They were actually built by Brill in the 1890s in Philadelphia. They were in pristine condition. They were selling them off over there, and us and a whole host of American cities got on the bandwagon. If you notice, these are narrow gauge cars. They operated originally just from Grand Circus up to Cobo Hall, and they later extended the line over to the Renaissance Center. In the car house, this car house is completely gone.
Some of these went to various different places after they left Detroit, right?
Nope, these cars are still all in the city of Detroit, everywhere.
Including the double decker.
Absolutely.
Just kidding, I didn't
Warehouse
realize.
The double decker and the open bench car are within 3 miles of where we're standing currently right now.
There's a warehouse someplace there.
They're currently in the former car barn over Shoemaker Terminal.
Wow.
Yeah, unfortunately it's 98. Now this car here, beautiful car, open bench car. Now, just to add insult to injury, the city of Detroit sent this car out to a outstanding firm that restores these type of cars. They specialize in old-time street cars out in Seattle, Washington. They trucked it out. This car came back in A1 condition. It is just like it is brand new. Unfortunately, when it came back, the city decided to abandon Washington Boulevard. The line was completely gone, never operated, and is currently in storage over at Shoemaker Terminal. Waiting deposition.
Is
No,
and
yeah.
passing in front of me. That was the old front of Cobble Hall. Even this is torn cold up. And the famed car they brought over from England, this double-decker train, I don't know of another one in the country. It's certainly very limited, very popular. I don't know how many museums would love to have this car. Now, unfortunately, if you want to hear another bad story, in order to fit this in to the bus bay over at Shoemaker, yes, they did, they had to take the top off. Now, fortunately, I guess they did it in such a way, I guess we could get it back together, but that's the type of thing. But it's in pieces. And that's actually a shot from the double-decker shown in the line moving back to our Grand Circus Park. This is another car that came up from Cleveland. It was a little town in Switzerland, and I forget the name of it. It's Hershey's Chocolate. Hershey was behind it. When they operated, actually, the conductor actually was passing out free Hershey Chucky candy bars, whatever, the car. Fortunately, they had a lot of problems. They never operated all that often. And just some shots showing the line. I mean, it's hard to believe. They also went out during the holidays, had a little Christmas decorating party. This is in front of the car barn.
How many cars were there?
There was the open bench, the double-decker, and 6 of these guys. And they also brought over a couple scrap cars, which really were in bad shape, but they needed them for the parts. Now, fortunately, most of them are within covered, heated areas. What they're going to do, I have no idea.
Did Detroit ever have cars like that?
No, well, not quite like that. Of course, this is narrow gauge. Detroit never had narrow gauge, except for that little horse-drawn Carolina and Woodward. Of course, the other rail operation, which we still operate, as I mentioned, is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. It will be 20 years old on August the 1st. Our downtown people movers. And showing, of course, crossing the Washington Boulevard line, which we can't do. This is up at the car barn. Showing its original paint scheme, and even this now, its history has gone to a couple different paint schemes and a whole host of advertising. Going by the Lansdowne, Landfill Hall. Yeah, that's also going.
Yeah.
Passing by the Renaissance Center. Passing over by the Landstone. Now, just for our traction bus, Detroit also had 3 different eras of electric trolley bus operations. Now, I just rarely remember seeing a couple of the trolley coaches on the Grand River line in downtown Detroit. It was very young. Saw them and asked to have me go for a ride. Well, we never get a ride because they were gone before I got home. But this is a map of all the lines that they actually operated over the years, and this was all going by 1962. They had some early times in the 1920s. They experimented. They opened up another line in the 30s, and then they didn't do anything to the board. This is an early experimental trolley coach. This is on Harper in Montclair looking east. The DSR is testing a Packard trolley bus, and the body was built by Grill 1921. Excuse me. The DSR second trolley bus was also a Packard, but the body was built by Coleman. In 1924, second test was made with this Brill trolley coach number 61 on Warren between St. Jean and Cadillac.
Hard rubber tires?
Hard rubber tires. You better believe it. This one was actually saying up in Philadelphia. On June 14, 1930, the DSR truly inaugurated trolley bus service on Plymouth Road, operating from Grand River to the Rouge Park using 6 of these twin trolley coaches. Here we are turning the corner of Grand River and Plymouth, the end of the line. This was followed after the war. The DSR decided to replace coaches with trolley buses. On the crosstown line, 60 twin coaches were purchased for this service. And we have a couple shots of the twins, one of my favorite buses. I remember this was a trolley, but they also operated diesel coaches. And also the St. Louis, this is on the Grand River line, and they built 80 of these St. Louis built trolley buses, and they were used to the end of the trolley coach service in 1962. Just a couple shots here. And that's the end.
trolley came, run away and watch the conductor get out there and get out there.
Pennies on the rail.
No, there really isn't. Except kids today.
It's an interesting thing to note on your trolley buses, that you noticed you had two arms going up to the wires, and that's because you had to get a ground circuit. On the regular streetcar, the rails were the ground.
That's right, that's right. Double wires, that's right.
The double wires, as soon as that line was cleared, the guys in the salt trucks kept their beds up and ripped the trolley down all the time.
Well, the trolley coaches, I mean, were very clean, very efficient, noiseless, I mean, very quiet. Several cities still operate. The closest one here is Dayton, Ohio. I was down there a couple years ago, and they not only like the trolley coaches, but they've expanded. They've gone to diesel, electric, where they can operate off the line, but it's very cool.
Pull the mic off there and hold it, then, so you can talk.
But, there's only a handful of cities still with the electric trolley coaches. San Francisco, Seattle, Philadelphia, Boston, Dayton, Vancouver. They're very good. I mean, like in Seattle, San Francisco, where they got a lot of those, they're much more powerful than the diesel coach. They're very clean, very efficient. Of course, the fuel cost, big savings right now. But they are expensive. You gotta keep up the overhead. They're limited. You gotta be within a few feet of the overhead line, like streetcars. But at least they, Detroit experiment, they use them for a number of years.
So the Highland Park building still standing?
Highland Park is completely gone. The only thing left of the Highland Park shops is the power substation, which Public Lighting still uses. I think they call it terminal power. It's on either second or third. They're still generating. They're still there. But other than that, everything, all the buildings, they got a shopping complex along Woodward, Manchester. They got housing and condos in the back. And I remember going there with my dad, in the early 70s. We were walking through some of the abandoned buildings, and but no rental whatsoever in the major buildings.
Washington Boulevard one?
Well, let's see, they quit in October, and it's been, is it going on 4 years?
Yeah, it was
2003.
2003.
2003, it's hard to believe it's been 4 years. Unfortunately, the mayor, again, this was never through the tracks, everything is gone. There is nothing. If you go down there, there is nothing. There, unlike the streetcar lines and the DSR, where they simply paved it over, blacktopped it, they ripped up the rails on Washington Boulevard.
Except for 10 feet of it was cut into 1 inch sections.
That's right. Fortunately, we got the walk, we got the workers to save us a piece. We got a few cylinder plants made up.
During the Depression, a lot of cities got WPA money.
Yes.
For rapid transit like Clayton. Was that offered to Detroit, and if so, whatever happened?
Well, I'm not sure if it was directly offered. Like I say, one of the things they did do was convert some of the Peter Woods to the 3-door. I think that was a WPA generated. But Detroit, and my dad has got a library full of studies dating back to 1919 of some of the most elaborate detailed plans for rapid transit, included either subway, commuter rail, even monorails and overhead rapid transit. And time again, they go to the electorate, and for whatever reason, they voted it down. And they've had so many opportunities. They were going to come down, like the freeway system, when they were building I-94 in the lines, their plan was like Chicago, to build a rapid transit line in the middle median and have both the highway and the rapid transit. If you go into downtown Chicago on I-94, you come across the Dan Ryan rapid transit, and that was offered here, and for whatever reason, didn't get off the ground.
2 Detroit mayors ago, there used to be a station between the Belle Isle Bridge and Broadhead. Was that a trolley station, train station, bus station?
Well, there was what they call the Belle Isle Coach Station. It really was, at one time, it was really strictly for buses going over to Belle Isle. It had a very elaborate, I remember seeing it, I never was in the building. That was tore down under the Coleman Young administration. They moved so fast to get rid of it. We didn't even have a chance to save, they used to have a stop on it, and, basically, for the bus service over to Belle Isle, and I know it's kind of hard to imagine in this day and age, but it was a major endeavor in the 20s and 30s. I mean, a lot of people, you didn't drive over, you'd take the streetcar somewhere to get over to Jefferson and the bridge going over, and you'd either walk across or you could take on the bus for, nickel, whatever. And, the DSR operated, also Parks and Rec operated in the early 20s, their own fleet of buses. So that bus station, they had one there, and they also had another one, actually on Bell Island, which is kind of a waiting area to keep out of the rain. I understand, I think they even had concession stands and probably some restaurants in there as well. But it come in hard times by 1980, and I think by 1980, 81, when it really was kind of like the middle of the night. Next morning, we went down Jefferson, and it was flat, it was just gone, so a little bit of history going on there.
Was there a streetcar down the shore through Mount Atlantic or Jordan?
Well, the old line, before, in conjunction with this, the Detroit United operated along Jefferson and along the shoreline. They had two lines. One line went up Gratiot, and where we ended at 8 Mile Road in Eastwood Park, the DUR operated up Gratiot all the way up to Mount Clemens. The shoreline would come up along Jefferson, where we were showing Weaver Loop there, we were showing the abandoned track. It'd come up along Jefferson, and here it operated along Jefferson up to Fisher Road. Now that wall you see on Fisher Road, that old wall that looks like, well, we all figured that was there when the DUR, the old interurban operated. The interurban would turn there and go up into Lakeshore Boulevard, take a right, and would take that down to Ross. And of course, the reason is they didn't go down Jefferson is because even back then, you had all the big homes on Lakeshore. And the property owners did not want to see the interurban going in front of the.
That's how Grosse Pointe Boulevard was created, because the homeowners went to court to sue to keep the train off Lakeshore Road.
That's right, and they went up to Ross, made a turn, and went up to Kirchhoff, and then Kirchhoff down to Weir Lane, where they were not right on Weir Lane itself, but they had the little private right of way. They went back to Lakeshore, and from Lakeshore all the way through St. Clair Shores, up to Crocker, and at Crocker, they would then go back into downtown Mount Clemens and join the line from Gratiot. And that line, you could go all the way up along the shoreline, up through Elginak and Fairhaven, and all the way up into St. Clair and Fort Huron. So it was a big system, it was a big operation.
What years did that operate along Lakeshore there?
It operated until about 1927. It was one of the earlier DUR abandonments. By that time, you were getting a lot of competition. The roads were getting paved, you had buses, and within a few years, of course, with the Depression, really, that was really finalized the end of the urban by that point.
And the shoreline there, there's a state marker in front of Blossom Heath.
Yes.
There's two pieces of track, the shoreline and the urban, yeah, that's state historic marker.
When did that service begin up Lakeshore?
Oh, the exact date probably about, I think it was around, well, in fact, you know what, it is 1890, because we put the marker on the 100th anniversary. It's 1896, 1897. Yeah, because it's hard to believe that marker has been about 10 years. When we were there for the dedication, it was for the dedication of the 100th anniversary of the shoreline in urban. Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, you didn't mention, but the overhead for the streetcars was 600 volts DC. And I used to work at some of the substations, for Edison, when we generated that power.
That's right. Very powerful, yeah.
I was the lineman for the DSR.
You were here. Oh, my gosh.
About 3 years, I was a cash service, money handler.
Oh, my gosh.
And we used to bail all the money up and take it over to the administration building.
That's right, because the DSR, in order to collect all the money from all the different terminals and take it over to the main office, they had their own money trucks going across the city. Their own competition to Edison, but the DSR generated their own power, they had their own substation. No, they had their own power station.
Ken, you've got copies of your father's books still available.
Yeah, and if you have any questions.
And I'll tell you, they go for like $100 in John King in used condition, and here they are $80, so.
That's right.
We thank you all for coming. Good. Any other questions? If not, I think the last 3 cookies are back there, there's still iced tea and water. Thank you. Thank you.